On a hot Australian day in 1966, the city of Adelaide was in full holiday mode. Beaches were packed and families let their children roam free without thinking twice. Glenelg Beach, a popular stretch of coast just south of the city center, was one of those places that seemed immune to danger. The water gently lapped the sand, and children's laughter mixed with the cries of gulls. In the pre-dawn hours of January 26th, three siblings, 9-year-old Jane Beaumont, her 7-year-old sister Anna, and their 4-year-old brother Grant, left their Somerton Park home carrying beach towels and coins for the bus fare. They were expected home by noon. Their mother Nancy felt no fear in letting them go. It was, after all, 1966, a time when children were allowed to roam freely, and the prevailing belief was that communities were safe and people could leave their front doors unlocked. So the children caught an early bus at 8:45 a.m., cheerfully waving to their neighbors. Jane wore a one-piece swimsuit beneath her sundress. Anna carried a small purse, and Grant clutched a plastic spade. Their father, Jim, was away on a brief work trip. Nancy anticipated hearing the front door bang open at noon as the three sun-kissed faces tumbled in. When they did not arrive on the first bus, she told herself they might have lost track of time. They're kids after all. When they weren't on the second bus at 2 p.m., a hollow feeling began to form. By the time her husband Jim returned home around 3 p.m., Nancy was waiting on the veranda watching an empty street. Jim took one look at his wife's face and knew in his gut something was wrong. He drove straight to the beach in search of the children. However, several hours later, as daylight faded, they were at the Glenelg police station, registering the disappearance of their 3 children. What happened after the Beaumont children boarded that morning bus would remain one of the most unsettling mysteries in Australian history. The case not only shattered the assumption that children could wander freely without consequence, but it also became a lens through which to examine changing attitudes about safety, trust, and the predators that lurk in seemingly tranquil places. To understand why the disappearance of Jane, Anna, and Grant continues to haunt the Australian psyche, we must trace their last known movements and grapple with decades of theories that attempt to explain the inexplicable. So hello everybody, today we're talking about the disappearance of the Beaumont children. This story is certainly a time capsule. I mean, nowadays it would be laughable to imagine 3 kids taking a bus to the beach by themselves. But this was a time when something like child abduction was unheard of, or at least unreported. And this case is one of the most notable for making people wake up to the idea that there are bad people out there. So we're going to go through a timeline of events, talk about the theories as to what might have happened. So if that sounds interesting to you, then stick around after the ad as we talk about the Beaumont children disappearance. Nowadays, it seems like we do all our shopping online. Especially when it comes to purchases that matter, it's hard to always find something that's your size, the quantity you want, and the price that's right. Except weirdly when it comes to phone plans. You know, the thing we access the internet with. But now, you can get a phone plan the way you want it thanks to today's sponsor, Mint Mobile. Mint reimagined the wireless shopping experience so that you can get exactly what you need online with no shops and no salespeople. And Mint's the provider that always gives you exactly what you need. Mint has premium wireless plans starting at as little as $15 a month. Not only are they $15 a month, but all plans include unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network, plus free calling to Mexico, Canada, and the UK. Plus hotspots included with 20 gigabytes on their unlimited plans. 98% of Americans are covered by their 5G coverage, and 99% are covered by their 4G LTE coverage. And instead of overpaying for a one-size-fits-all, you can choose as much data as you want. You can select from 5 gigabytes, 15 gigabytes, 20 gigabytes, or unlimited data every month. And the more you buy up front, the more you save. They have plans in 3-month, 6-month, and year-long durations. You can use your own phone or get a new one through Mint. And regardless of which option you choose, you'll be able to keep your phone number and all your contacts. You can sign up online and activate an eSIM at home, and the whole thing's done in a few minutes. A lot of people think it's hard to switch their phone provider because every time they go to a store in person, it seems to be an arduous process. But if you do it online through Mint Mobile, you can be done before this video's over. No wonder 96% of users rate themselves as satisfied with Mint's customer care. And to top it all off, all of their plans come with an unconditional 7-day money-back guarantee. So for a week, what's the worst that could happen? Mint Mobile's the perfect way to bring coverage into the comfort of the modern age. And if you're looking to get in on Mint, then now's the perfect time. Because if you like your money, Mint Mobile's for you. And if you shop for plans at the link in the description at mintmobile.com/Wendigang, you'll be able to shop for plans starting at $15 a month. Once again, that's mintmobile.com/Wendigang to get in on their incredible offer today. Thank you all for watching the ad. Thank you to Mint Mobile for sponsoring the channel. Their link will be in the description, and we are now back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. Glenelg Beach in the mid-1960s was a magnet for families. Children loved building sandcastles, and the nearby amusement park's roller coaster would rattle with squeals of delight. On the morning of January 26th, multiple eyewitnesses noticed the Beaumont children playing in the shallow water and digging in the sand. They also noticed an unfamiliar man hovering nearby. This man was described as tall, between 30 and 40, with a long face and a high forehead. A forehead with short blonde to light brown hair. Some said he had an athletic build but didn't seem menacing. One witness recalled hearing the man tell bystanders that the children's money had been stolen, explaining why he might be with them. Now, to modern ears, I imagine that this sounds suspiciously like a script for a child abduction. Oh no, these 3 unsupervised children need money that they lost, so I'm helping them find that. At the time, it was interpreted as a concerned adult helping 3 little kids. Remember, this was a time where people trusted each other and felt they all had the purest of intentions. Which, when you think about it, is a tragedy, right? I mean, yeah, we all hear that nowadays and ask, why would the parents let their kids go to the beach by themselves? Or why didn't everyone else assume that person was a predator? Which, yes, are all logical thoughts, but it's a shame that we're not in a place where people can be trusted. I remember getting separated from my parents at the mall as a kid, which happened multiple times because I was evil. And on 2 occasions, I remember some kind stranger taking me back. It is possible for good people to be out there, but I feel like now, if I saw a stranger leading a kid around, I wouldn't believe him. Some random man's holding a little girl's hand and he's like, oh, I'm helping her find her mom. I think I would stick around. I'd be like, oh, are you? Well, why don't we find her together? And then a third guy comes by and me and the man are like, oh, we're helping her find her mom. The third guy's like, oh, are you? By the end of it, it's like the 12 disciples delivering a child to their mother. But it really is a shame that goodness is the exception rather than the norm we think of. But also, at the same time, perhaps there's no harm in being too cautious. I mean, worst case scenario with the story I just mentioned is that people are a little too afraid of the child's safety. And regardless, the child's reunited and all is right in the end. Whereas on the other side of the fence, if that person is being malicious with the kids, well, then the consequences of assuming the best intentions are far too horrible. I guess all that to say, it just sucks that we always have to assume people are up to no good, but we have to because when we don't, we get stories like the one we're talking about today. The Beaumont children, in fact, appeared relaxed and cheerful, according to those who saw them. The middle child, Arna, who I've been referring to as Anna up until now because I'm stupid, Arna had recently told her mother that Jane had, quote, got a boyfriend down the beach. Nancy assumed it meant a beach playmate and thought nothing of it. Only in retrospect, this offhand comment seemed like a red flag. Suggestion that the children might have met this man before and developed trust, which, gosh, man, that comment is haunting. But you know, that comment could have meant nothing. There could have just been a kid their age who Jane liked to play with. But what if it wasn't? Imagine how terrible the parents would feel knowing they didn't ask those questions. Around 12:15 p.m., witnesses saw Jane, Arna, and Grant walking away from the beach in the company of the man. They were later spotted at Wenzel's Cakes, a nearby bakery. There, 9-year-old Jane purchased a meat pie, pasties, buns, and fizzy drinks. She paid with a £1 note, a sizable sum, given that the children's mother had given them only 6 shillings and 6 pence for bus fare and snacks. Shopkeeper, who knew the children, told police they had never bought meat pies before. Police later cited this purchase as evidence that the children were accompanied by an adult who provided additional money. The transaction at Wenzel's became the last confirmed sighting of the Beaumont children. When Jim Beaumont scoured Glenelg Beach and the surrounding streets that afternoon, he assumed he would see his children chasing gulls or wandering out from a crowd of sunbathers. Jim and Nancy decided to report them missing at the Glenelg police station by 5:30 p.m. and were told that the children probably had simply lost track of time. Officers initially searched the immediate area and then expanded to adjacent beaches and neighborhoods by nightfall, and sea rescue volunteers patrolled the shoreline after dark. As the search expanded, chilling fear took hold. Within 3 days, headlines read, quote, "Sex crime now feared," reflecting a rapidly evolving dread that the children had been abducted by a predator. Which, even if that is your fear, what kind of headline is that? There are 3 kids under the age of 10. One of them as young as 4. And you're going to put "sex crime now feared" on the top of the paper that their parents read? That's Awful, but also typical of the time, I guess. I know it wasn't the exact same time, but I always think of the Black Dahlia murder, where a woman was tragically ripped in half, and when the press figured out who her family was, they called and pretended to be like a modeling agency to ask questions about her, and then after they got all the info they wanted, then told the parents that they're actually a journalist and their daughter's dead. Like, I know journalists are scummy now, but at least there's enough of a platform that they have to hide the scumminess a little bit. When no one was keeping track of that kind of thing, it's amazing what they got up to. The police investigation began with the assumption that the children were nearby and perhaps lost, but within 24 hours, the whole nation knew of the case. In the days that followed, the search expanded to airports, rail lines, and interstate roads, based on concerns that the children might have been taken out of the state. Authorities strained the paddle along a boat haven when a woman reported speaking with the children there on the day of the disappearance. Ground, air, and sea searches turned up no trace. By the end of January, the investigation shifted from a search and rescue operation to a protracted criminal inquiry. The first reward offered for information was a mere £250. Reflecting an initial assumption that the case would soon be solved. While considering the year is 2026, it was not. The disappearance of the Beaumont children coincided with a broader shift in Australian society's understanding of child safety. In 1966, sexual assault was rarely discussed publicly. The recorded rate of rape in Australia was 2.8 per 100,000 people, far lower than the rate in the 2020s. There was no registry for sex offenders and little awareness of how predators might groom children. A criminologist interviewed decades later described the Beaumont case as the day that Adelaide lost its sense of innocence. The case shocked parents into keeping tighter reins on their children and fostered a fear that any unattended child could be vulnerable to abduction. Public trust, which always happens with incredible ease, was broken, and the front doors became locked. Which, as mentioned, tragic you have to do that, but also, just watch your kids. Not even for the sake of predators or whatever, but do you trust them to always look both ways before they cross the street? The case also drew attention to the prevalence of sexual abuse, forcing a reckoning with the topic that had long been kept in the shadows. Prior to 1966, the idea of stranger danger was not part of the public lexicon. Children walked to school alone, went to the beach with pocket change for the bus, and spent summer days out of sight of adults. Parents assumed that if their child encountered a problem, a kindly adult would intervene. In the years after the Beaumont case, those assumptions evaporated. Schools began teaching children not to talk to strangers, families established codes for emergencies, and communities organized neighborhood watch programs. Legislatures introduced laws requiring police to release information about sex offenders living in the community, and law enforcement agencies across Australia developed specialized units dedicated to missing persons and child exploitation. Similar actions took place in the United States and across the world. I have a whole video on the main channel about how in the United States, missing children started to get printed on milk cartons. Today, Amber Alert-style alert systems and social media posts spread news of missing children within minutes. These developments owe much to the shockwave created by the Beaumont disappearance. The case not only altered how parents supervise their children, but also influenced public policy and policing. When the weeks turned into months without any leads, desperation prompted extraordinary measures. In November of 1966, 10 months after the disappearance, a Dutch clairvoyant named Gerard Crozet flew to Adelaide. Crozet was known for claiming to assist police in missing person cases, which, just looking at a picture of this guy, that doesn't surprise me a bit. This absolutely looks like the kind of guy who says he talks to ghosts to find missing children. I don't even really mean that in a negative way. I'd probably talk to him. It's just, look at him. He told authorities that the Beaumont children were buried under a newly constructed warehouse on an old brick factory site. Against police advice, as you can imagine, funds were raised for an excavation, and heavy equipment tore up the concrete floor. If you couldn't guess, nothing was found. Though it seems silly to trust someone like a clairvoyant, who many would consider a con man, like me, desperation was at its peak to find the children. Crozet's involvement became a surreal chapter in the investigation. The media breathlessly covered his arrival and pronouncements. When the dig produced no bodies, many criticized the decision to entertain a psychic's claims. Skeptics later pointed out that Crozet's success rate was no better than chance. He had been wrong in numerous other cases. I just think it's funny that a dude who said he could talk to ghosts to find the missing children flew to Australia, and everyone treated it like a big deal. Nowadays that kind of thing probably happens a lot, but no one points a camera at it. But back then, everyone step aside. The psychic stepping into the ring. It's also funny to imagine it from the police's perspective, because this guy shows up and he's like, yes, the spirits are telling me they're under this very expensive warehouse that the city just built. And the police had to be like... In early 1968, 2 years after the disappearance, the Beaumont parents suddenly received a pair of letters. This revived their hopes, if but briefly. The first letter purportedly came from Jane, describing a relatively pleasant life and referring to a figure she called the man who was keeping them. The second letter, apparently from this unknown man, said he had appointed himself guardian of the children and was willing to return them. The Beaumonts, accompanied by a detective, went to the meeting point, but no one showed up. A third letter then arrived, accusing the parents of betrayal for involving the police and stating that the man would now keep the children. For years, police and the Beaumonts believed the letters might be genuine, as the handwriting resembled Jane's. It wasn't until 1992, 26 years after the disappearance, when forensic fingerprinting techniques advanced, that a renewed examination identified the author. The author was a 41-year-old man who had been a teenager at the time and wrote the letters as a crude joke. The revelation dashed any lingering hopes that the children might be alive in captivity. It also highlighted how easily desperate parents can become targets for hoaxes. The letter writer was never charged due to the statute of limitations, which I get he's 41 now and he was a teenager there, but there's like an ongoing evil to, like, sure, teenagers are dumb, they do evil things. But to go 41 years of your life and never tell anyone that, or never go to the parents and be like, hey, I did this bad thing, sorry. I mean, you could charge him with, like, I don't know, fabricating evidence or contempt of something. Once again, this was also something that happened a few times in the milk carton video. It's so tragic that anytime a parent loses a child, so many goblins come out of the woodwork and try to tease them with the idea that their child's still alive. Goes back to what I said earlier. It's lame that we have to assume people are bad, but I mean, look at what people keep doing. Through the 1970s and 1980s, the Beaumont case sat unsolved, but it never left the public consciousness. Detectives revisited files and pursued occasional tips. Some investigators speculated that the Beaumont disappearance might be linked to other child abductions. The case of Joanne Ratcliffe and Kirsty Gordon, known as the Adelaide Oval abductions, occurred in 1973 when two girls were taken from a football match. Despite extensive searches, a reward, and media attention, that case also went cold. Many of the suspects in the Beaumont disappearance also appeared in the Adelaide Oval investigation. The parallel of multiple children taken in a public place fueled theories of a repeat offender operating in South Australia. In the decades that followed, strange tips trickled in. Claims of cult involvement, sightings of the children as adults in other cities, and rumors that the children had been sold into adoption. The Beaumont parents cooperated with every investigation, no matter how implausible. Media intrusion in the 1990s added new pain when newspapers published computer-generated images depicting how Jane, Arna, and Grant might look as adults. Jim and Nancy, struggling to cope with decades of grief and attention, as you could imagine, eventually divorced and withdrew from public view. And it's also just so tragic but understandable how so many lives can be unraveled in a moment. I mean, up until that day, I'm sure everything was going great for this family. 3 kids, loving house by the beach, and one day they get on a bus, and from that moment on, your lives are gone. It's not to say you can't rebuild later and that good can't come out of the time you have left, but what you did have just isn't there anymore. It's tragic, and it's hard to not have your heart break for these people. The turn of the millennium brought a renewed surge of interest in the Beaumont case. Advances in forensic technology allowed investigators to re-examine old evidence. On the 40th anniversary in 2006, police poured over archival news footage of the 1966 search, looking for any familiar faces in the crowd. Meanwhile, investigative journalists brought new persons of interest to light. Lead detective on the case, Detective Superintendent Desprez, noted that even 50 years after the disappearance, police still received up to 1 call every 4 days about the case. He also acknowledged that time was the enemy. Any perpetrator would now be between 70 and 100 years old. Several suspects have dominated public speculation. None has ever been charged in connection with the Beaumont disappearance, but each merits examination for what their stories reveal about the case and the era. So let's go through some of these suspects and see who seems more likely than others. One of the most compelling suspects is Harry Phipps, an affluent Adelaide businessman and owner of a local casting factory. He became widely associated with the case after the 2013 publication of The Satin Man, a book by Stuart Mullins and Alan Whitaker. The authors spent 7 years researching the Beaumont case and interviewed Phipps' estranged son, Hayden. Hayden claimed that his father gave out £1 notes to children and that he saw the Beaumont children in Phipps' backyard the day that they disappeared. He also alleged that his father had violently abused him as a child. This would explain how the kids paid for the meat pies with £1 and why a witness didn't come forward at the time, because if Hayden's to be believed, the only witness was a child who was afraid of abuse. Phipps matched the police sketch of the man seen with the children. Tall, blonde, and 30-something. He lived only 300 meters from Glenelg Beach. However, he died in 2004 and left no confession. After the book's release, police used ground-penetrating radar to search the factory grounds he once owned. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, sends electromagnetic waves into the ground and analyzes the reflected signals to detect anomalies. If I remember right, they did the same thing to the Detroit Lions football stadium in search of the body of Jimmy Hoffa, which is cute and all, but the mob didn't leave that guy as a whole body. He definitely got ran through a meat grinder. That was a crazy graphic sentence to drop in the middle of this video. My bad. The technology can identify disturbed soil patterns that might indicate graves, though it cannot distinguish a buried bone from a rock. One anomaly was detected in 2013, but subsequent digging found nothing. New excavations took place in 2018 and 2025. That's right, as recent as last year, there were still people digging up things in relation to the case. In 2018, two brothers came forward to say that Phipps had paid them to dig a hole in his factory property in 1966, which, real cool of them to wait 52 years, but better late than never. Electrical resistivity tomography identified a small anomaly, but the dig only uncovered animal bones. By 2025, investigators conducted what they called a final excavation, digging deeper and wider based on claims that previous searches had not gone deep enough. In this dig, no human remains were found. Though Phipps remains a prime suspect in public imagination due to his proximity, matching description, and alleged behavior, there's no physical evidence linking him to the Beaumont children's disappearance. Digging into Phipps' story offers a look at how suspicion can follow pre-existing notions people have about someone based on matters like class, socioeconomic standing. Phipps was a wealthy industrialist with a reputation for eccentricity. Some neighbors described him as generous, and others whispered about his private life. Allegations of pedophilia surfaced long after his death, primarily through his son's testimony. The fact that he handed out pound notes to children, which might have seemed innocent in the 1960s, took a sinister move in hindsight. As an affluent businessman living near the beach, Phipps embodied a certain type of suspect that simultaneously repelled and fascinated. Some found it easier to imagine an anonymous drifter committing the crimes rather than a suspected businessman, while others salivated at the notion of a fall from grace, the idea that behind every wealthy, successful man is a trove of dark secrets. When the Satin Man hit bookstores, sales were propelled by the allure of an unsolved mystery implicating the rich. Each time heavy machinery appeared at the Castillo factory, reports gathered, cameras rolled. Phipps' family, meanwhile, called the searches a smear campaign. So with Phipps out of the way, let's move on to suspect number 2. Bevan Spencer Vonnenem is another name frequently mentioned in this case. In 1984, he was convicted of murdering 15-year-old Richard Kelvin. Kelvin's abduction formed part of what became known as the Family Murders, a series of killings that shook Adelaide in the early 80s. Investigators believe that a loose network of well-connected men, doctors, businessmen, and other professionals lured teenage boys, drugged them, sexually abused them, and sometimes killed them. Bevan's conviction exposed a hidden world of predatory behavior among the city's elite, but the idea of an organized network remains highly contested. Investigators acknowledge that there may have been multiple offenders, yet the alleged ring was never proven. Only Bevan was convicted, and no conclusive evidence linked any well-connected conspirators to the murders. In other words, the notion of a secret cabal is more speculation than established fact. Rumors persisted that powerful figures shielded perpetrators for years, but police inquiries have never substantiated those claims. Which, yes, it's fully possible that Bevan was the only killer and he just did it so much that people thought there might be other killers. But the idea of high-ranking members of society, using their influence to participate in these grisly acts, especially against children, and then using said influence to ensure that they're never prosecuted for it, definitely doesn't happen. And we should never imagine that happens because it just doesn't happen, because it doesn't. Bevan, 20 at the time of the Beaumont disappearance, bore a resemblance to the suspect's sketch in facial features and hair color, but he was younger than the witnesses' estimates. In 1989, a confidential police report identified him as a potential suspect. An informant, known as Mr. B, told police that Bevan boasted about taking 3 children from a beach several years earlier, performing, quote, experiments and disposing of the bodies in the remote bushland. The story, of course, is chilling, part mad scientist fantasy and part confession, and it fueled speculation that the Beaumont case might be connected to the same network that carried out the family murders. Yet investigators noted that other details Mr. B provided did not match known facts. Bevan's known victims were adolescent boys, not young children, and he would have been just 20 years old in 1966, not matching everyone's reports of a man in his 30s. It's very popular that someone had a grudge against Bevan, or after the murders just said that this guy also did the Beaumont murders, and again, most telling, this anonymous informant was wrong about known facts. Still, the Bevan hypothesis forces us to consider that the Beaumont disappearance may not have been an isolated act, but part of a broader culture of exploitation. Family murders revealed that predators sometimes operate together, sharing victims and swapping stories. It also showed how their crimes could remain hidden for years because victims were from marginalized groups, and perpetrators had social standing. By placing Bevan on the suspect list, investigators implicitly asked, could the Beaumont children have been early victims of a similar network? While authorities have never ruled Bevan out, there's no conclusive evidence connecting him to the Beaumont disappearance. The suspicion endures largely because his latter crimes were so heinous and because his face seems to float close to the composite drawing. So with Bevan out of the way, we have our third suspect, Arthur Stanley Brown. Brown was charged in 1988 for the 1970 abduction and murder of sisters Judith and Susan McKay in Townsville. The story of Judith and Susan McKay is often mentioned only in passing when discussing Arthur Stanley Brown, but their fate deserves more than a footnote. So, in August of 1970, 4 years after the Beaumont children vanished, 7-year-old Judith and her 5-year-old sister Susan left their home in Townsville, Queensland. They were leaving that morning to catch a bus to school. It was a route they had traveled many times. Short walk to the bus stop, then a ride to the William Ross State School. Their mother, anxious about them hitchhiking, insisted that they wait for the bus. She even turned down one neighbor's offer to drive them because the girls were supposed to learn to be responsible. However, that day, instead of climbing aboard the yellow school bus, the McKay sisters vanished. The hours that followed mirrored the creeping dread Nancy Beaumont felt in 1966. When Judith and Susan failed to arrive at school, teachers assumed the girls were simply running late. As morning turned to afternoon, alarm bells rang. Their mother reported them missing, and police launched a frantic search. Again, this is in a post-Beaumont Australia. The police are no longer saying perhaps they lost track of time. Now, they're worried. Over the next 2 days, volunteers combed creek beds, cane fields, and suburban streets for any trace of the McKay sisters. On August 28th, a local man found 2 small bodies lying fully clothed near a rock culvert on the northern outskirts of Townsville. The discovery extinguished any remaining optimism of finding them alive. Both of the young girls had been sexually assaulted and murdered. Judith had been stabbed and beaten with a rock. Susan had been stabbed multiple times. Their hands were bound, and it appeared their killer had attempted to conceal them beneath grass and stones. In a community accustomed to leaving doors unlocked, the brutality of the crimes sent shockwaves through Queensland. Investigators learned that witnesses had seen the sisters at the bus stop talking to a middle-aged man driving a cream-colored car. The man allegedly offered to give the girls a ride, but was told to, quote, mind your own business. The man being told this when another mother intervened. According to later testimony, Judith told her mother that a, quote, funny man had been watching them on previous mornings, but the comment went unheard, perhaps dismissed as childish imagination. Again, just as Arna Beaumont's remark about Jane's boyfriend down at the beach had been dismissed as well. Police canvassed the area and checked the alibis of known offenders, but the investigation stalled when no strange suspect emerged. Rumors swirled around a traveling carnival worker, then around a traveling butcher. Each of these leads would fizzle out. The case might have remained an unsolved local tragedy if not for Arthur Stanley Brown's loose tongue. In the early 1990s, Brown, a well-respected employee at a Queensland State Works department, drunkenly confessed to raping and murdering Judith and Susan. He told colleagues that he, quote, picked up a couple of Sheilas, and left them, quote, out bush. Remarks so out of character that co-workers assumed he was joking or fantasizing. On a separate occasion, Brown allegedly confessed again, providing enough detail about the murders to alarm his listener. Both times, the admissions were dismissed. One friend later said he didn't want to believe that the soft-spoken gentleman he knew would commit such atrocities. Police took statements but failed to pursue the matter, citing Brown's clean record and respectable appearance. Social status and the benefit of the doubt shielded a potential predator from scrutiny. Well, in 1998, nearly 3 decades after the murders, a relative of Brown saw a television segment on the McKay case and contacted the police, saying that Brown matched the composite sketch. Investigators reopened the file and finally arrested Brown. During interviews, he acknowledged taking 2 girls from a bus stop, driving them to a friend's house, and leaving them in the car while he chatted inside. He claimed he returned to find the girls missing and assumed that they had walked home. As you can imagine, prosecutors didn't believe his story. He was charged with the murders of Judith and Susan, but his trial was later stayed because experts deemed him unfit due to Alzheimer's. So Brown died in 2002, having never faced a jury. For the McKay family, lack of a conviction felt like another betrayal by the justice system. So with that tragedy now spoken, what links Brown to the Beaumont case is, like most of the suspects, his physical resemblance to the composite sketch. However, there's a big problem. In 1966, he would have been in his mid-50s, whereas once again, if you remember, witnesses described a man in his 30s. Records of Brown's movements in the 1960s are scarce, some being destroyed in the 1974 Brisbane flood. Ultimately, no evidence places him in Adelaide at the time of the Beaumont disappearance. Brown's background also exposes a pattern of investigative blind spots. In the McKay case, his admission to the murders were ignored twice, partly because he presented as a respectable, well-dressed man. It wasn't until a relative, who herself, it would turn out, had been one of Brown's molestation victims, called the police after seeing the true crime television segment that authorities pursued him. And even then, Brown avoided trial due to his mental state. When considering Brown as a Beaumont suspect, we're left to confront a broader theme, that being the failure of institutions to connect dots across jurisdictions and decades. In the McKay case, Brown actually admitted his guilt twice, but police dismissed his confessions. Again, partly because he was respectable, but also because there was no centralized system for linking missing persons cases across state lines. Had early allegations against Brown been taken seriously and his movements properly documented, he might not have been free during the 1960s at the time of the disappearance. Whether or not he took the Beaumont children, his case highlights systemic weaknesses that allowed perpetrators to slip through the cracks. Until recently, Australian states did not routinely share investigative information. Missing person files were kept in local offices, and there was no national database. Low-level allegations against a well-dressed man could therefore be quietly forgotten. I mean, even today, cold case detectives stress that the lack of intra-agency cooperation, the loss of evidence, and the fading of witness memories are among the biggest barriers to solving historic crimes. Brown's story serves as a reminder that institutional red tape, miscommunication, and limited resources can be almost as dangerous as any individual predator. Another suspect in this case is Alan Anthony Monroe, who was a convicted child sex offender and former scoutmaster. His name entered the Beaumont investigation through Alan Maxwell McIntyre, who claimed that Monroe arrived at his house in 1966 with the bodies of 3 children in the trunk of his car, which, if that testimony is right, is pretty open and shut. McIntyre's son Andrew kept a diary that allegedly placed Monroe in the vicinity of Glenelg Beach on the day of the disappearance. Andrew wrote that he was supposed to go to the beach with his father and Monroe, but was told at the last minute to stay home. And when they returned, Monroe's car had sand and blood in it. But despite these claims, police had previously investigated Monroe and found no evidence connecting him to the Beaumont case. So the allegations, unfortunately, remain hearsay. Like many suspects, Monroe's candidacy reveals as much about the desperation to find answers as it does about his actual culpability. When any convicted offender surfaces in the same geographic or temporal orbit as the Beaumont mystery, speculation runs rampant. But the evidence against Monroe is, at best, circumstantial, being that the only thing they could prove is that he was, in fact, near the area, as was everyone else on the beach. It's also, a little too good. Like, everyone's searching for these kids, and one guy steps forward and is like, yeah, I know a guy who said he killed 3 children and put them in the trunk of his car. Here's my son's diary. He has a diary for some reason where he said that there was like blood and sand in the back of his car, which there would be a ton of evidence of that kind of thing, and there was none. Similar to the people pranking the parents, it's also wild to me how anytime this happens, there's a bunch of people who just make stuff up. In all of these high-profile investigations, there's always a plethora of tips the police have to wade through where people say their neighbor did it, people say Santa Claus did it. Once again, if there's no other running theme through this video, people aren't nice. They should be, but they're not, and that's sad. Another example of this, and suspect, is James Ryan O'Neill. O'Neill was convicted of murdering a 9-year-old boy in Tasmania in 1975. Like many others, he allegedly told acquaintances he was responsible for the Beaumont disappearance. Former detective Gordon Davey spent 3 years communicating with O'Neill and produced an ABC documentary, Fisherman, exploring his potential links to unsolved cases. When asked directly about the Beaumont children, O'Neill said he could not have done it because he was in Melbourne at the time, but he refused to elaborate, saying he would not speak about his whereabouts due to legal advice. O'Neill worked in the opal industry in the 1960s and frequently traveled to Cooper Pedy, which required passing through Adelaide. By these ambiguous statements and possible travel routes, police ultimately ruled him out. Finally, there was Derek Ernest Percy, a disturbed individual and convicted child murderer. Percy was in prison from 1969 until his death in 2013. He reportedly suffered from a psychological condition that affected his memory and suggested that he might have killed the Beaumont children, but could not recall doing so. Percy would have been a teenager in 1966, not a middle-aged man as described by witnesses. While investigators cross-checked Percy's timeline against numerous cold cases, there's no credible evidence linking him to the Beaumont abduction. And the fact he doesn't match the eyewitness accounts of the guy that almost definitely probably did it. Though there were, on the surface, many credible suspects, the truth would still be unknown. Despite the parallels and the confessions amongst peers, it seems that most of these suspects took the credit for one thing only: attention. The case was massive, and anyone who would be found guilty of the disappearance would be famous. As messed up as it sounds, there's many people who crave that level of attention, to such a degree that confessing to a crime that they did not commit, or of being on the receiving end of a crime, purely for the sake of fame is still something that occurs to this very day. Despite the exhaustive search, the clairvoyant episode, the hoax letters, and the long list of suspects, the Beaumont children's disappearance remains legally open. South Australia police maintain a policy that no murder investigation is ever closed, and a reward for information stands at $1 million. Yet, there's never been a conviction or even a single charge. Tragically, both parents went to their graves without knowing what happened to their kids. Nancy Beaumont died on September 16, 2019, and Jim Beaumont died on April 9, 2023. The case is now the oldest active missing persons investigation in Australia. The Beaumont case's legacy extends beyond the unsolved mystery. It fundamentally altered Australian parenting forever, and world parenting forever. Before 1966, children were allowed to roam neighborhoods, walk to school, or spend a day at the beach unsupervised. After the Beaumont disappearance, parents became far more cautious about letting their kids go out alone. The case stripped away the belief that life was sweet and straightforward. There weren't monsters hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike. The case also exposed the inadequacy of existing laws and resources for investigating child abductions, eventually leading to improved coordination among law enforcement agencies and greater public awareness of child safety. In this way, the children's sacrifice helped create a stronger system, both socially and legally, for combating crimes of this nature. So if nothing else, at least more children have been saved due to this tragedy. A detail that still haunts investigators to this day is why, if the children were abducted by a sex offender, has no evidence ever surfaced. South Australia's coastline is rugged, with sand dunes and scrub leading to endless bushland. There are countless places where a determined individual could hide evidence, yet decades of searches, including draining waterways and digging factory grounds, found nothing. The absence of any physical trace is almost as unsettling as the disappearance itself. It suggests either meticulous planning or incredible luck on the part of the perpetrator. The fact that so many suspects remain plausible yet unproven underscores the limitations of eyewitness testimony and the difficulty of cold case investigations. In the United States, police now solve only about half of all murders. The clearance rate has fallen from more than 90% in the 1960s to about 50% today. Experts note that cases are especially hard to crack when there is no clear relationship between the victim and the perpetrator, or when firearms are used, because there are fewer witnesses and less forensic evidence. As years pass, witness memories fade, physical evidence degrades or is lost, and detectives retire, taking their knowledge with them. On top of that, a composite sketch from witnesses' memories can match multiple men, especially over a longer period of time. Descriptions of height, hair color, and age are subjective, and misidentifications are common. Several suspects, Phipps, Brown, Monroe, Neal, and Percy, fit aspects of the description but fail in others. Their involvement becomes more a matter of speculation than evidence. It's incredibly easy how public imagination can fill in the gaps with narratives that fit broader fears, whether of predatory strangers, wealthy businessmen, or elite conspiracies. Each theory says as much about the anxieties of the era as it does about the facts. There's also the human tendency to seek patterns where none exist. Over the years, armchair detectives have scoured maps of Adelaide, marking the positions of suspects' homes, bus routes, and the beach. Some have suggested occult symbolism in the date or the ages of the children, and others have drawn lines connecting the Beaumont disappearances to other unsolved cases, creating webs that seem convincing until they collapse under scrutiny. These mental exercises speak to a deeper need to impose order onto this chaos, to believe that if one can only connect the dots, then justice will follow. Yet in the Beaumont case, the dots stubbornly refuse to align. And then there's the role that memory plays. Many of the witnesses who saw the man with the children were themselves children, or were distracted by the bustle of a crowded beach. Memories can be shaped by suggestion, media reports, and time. I mean, who's to say a teenager doesn't look 30 years old to a 10-year-old kid? By the time composite sketches were released, the description had been repeated so often that it solidified into a kind of collective hallucination. In later years, when suspects like Phipps and Brown emerged, people looked back at the sketch and saw what they wanted to see. Memory became both essential and unreliable, a factor that complicates any attempt to reopen the investigation. As we pictured the Beaumont children walking away from Glenelg Beach with an unknown man, it's tempting to impose narrative closure. We crave a culprit and a reason, and we want to believe that if we follow the right trail, then the mystery will be solved. Yet perhaps the most unsettling part of the Beaumont disappearance is its utter lack of resolution. The children vanished in broad daylight, in a crowded public space, with witnesses who saw them but could not later remember enough. Decades of investigations produced no proof of murder, no recovered bodies, and no confession. And this discomfort of uncertainty is itself a character in the story. In a world saturated with true crime docs and fictionalized mysteries that promise neat resolutions, the Beaumont case lingers because it denies closure. Each time a new suspect is proposed, a surge of hope rises that justice might finally be done. And each time excavations come up empty, or evidence comes to light providing an alibi to a suspect, that hope collapses. We're left instead with an accumulation of shards. A bus schedule, a bakery receipt, a sketch of a man's face. None on its own can tell us what happened, and together they only outline a void. It's possible that the truth lies buried in a file somewhere, or in a diary entry, a casual conversation, or forgotten police report. It may be that the perpetrator died decades ago, taking secrets to the grave. It may be that the children died sooner after they were taken, or, as some hope, that they lived on under assumed identities. But regardless, we can't be sure. The Beaumont case reminds us that even with modern forensics, some stories remain open wounds, telling us more about fear, community, and the fragility of trust than about the crime itself. What the case does offer is a lens through which to examine our own assumptions. Before the Beaumont disappearance, many parents believed that the world to be largely benign. Afterwards, caution and suspicion crept into daily life. The case underscores the importance of vigilant communities, of systems for reporting and responding to abuse, and of acknowledging the reality that predators can exist anywhere. A very sad, unfortunate reality, but a reality nonetheless. It's tragic to look back on a time when people were so hopeful and so trusting, and now just see it as naivete. I mean, is it inevitable that we were always going to be like this, that society was going to constantly be at odds or in fear of each other? I mean, we have several millennia of violence to our history. Perhaps that was just how it always would turn out. But in some way, I can't help but feel like something was lost, that sense of community and trust went away, and maybe we didn't do enough to keep it around. I mean, I know several small communities where this level of trust exists, but even within them, there's fear of outsiders. I don't know, maybe it's always been this way, maybe we were just dumb to it for a while, but it's sad that we can't be dumb together. And regardless of the tragedy of all of this, I like to believe that in whatever hereafter exists, the Beaumonts have found each other again. And hopefully you enjoyed isn't the right word. Hopefully you got something, learned information or whatever out of this video. And I want to say I appreciate it. And we just want to say Thank you for watching. I don't really think it was any of these guys, at least not conclusively. Phipps is the most fitting because of his age at the time and the account of his son, but again, there's no physical evidence. It's just the account of his son, really. So if that testimony is to be assumed true, then yeah, but otherwise, I don't think there's a lot to work with. It is frustrating how massive of a case it was and how little information exists. Hopefully the remains are found one day, and hopefully there's something to give the surviving relatives closure, but for now it's simply something we know about, for better or worse. But thank you all for sticking around for this video. Like I said in the previous video, starting from here, uploads should be weekly again, so stay tuned every Monday around noon Eastern until I inevitably do something stupid to get kicked off of that schedule. But we appreciate your all support regardless, and really, it means the world. With all that being said, I believe that should do it for now. Before I go, we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.